Hi folks, you're with us today, Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about or present a view that white Western people, particularly men, but white Western people generally, have been hugely disenfranchised by the globalist ideology and the globalist project. And I'll go through some of the many examples of this, but I just want to go back 25 years or so, or about that, where, and I've mentioned this before, I attended a lecture by one of the big pro-globalization propagandists. Not that I quite understood it at the time, but it was from it was the editor of a very big brand name economics journal and economics think tank, I guess you'd call it, that also did regular publications. And he, the smug fuck, was standing there. This was in Sydney, and he, I'll paraphrase it here, but he said, "Look, globalization is coming. Nothing you can do about it. That's how it is. If you don't like it, too bad. You don't get a say in it. You're just the hoi polloi, and why should the hoi polloi tell us, your betters how things should be?" So it was an incredible sort of arrogance and sense of entitlement, and so he says, "Look, as workers, people at the bottom end, you're now going to compete with the peasants of the world. So all the third world peasants, illiterate peasants, they can do the same jobs as you, the working class white people, can do. So you're now competing with them." So he said, if you want to keep the same standard of living as you have today, you either have to produce 40% more, work 40% longer hours, or have a 40% reduction in living standards. Now, the reduction in living standards is probably a little bit more than he forecast, but he's not far off. He was about right. I think it's declined a little bit more over the last 25 years than he prognosticated, but he's reasonably close to the mark. So now that meant the working week at the time, I think, was 38 and a half hours as average. So you would have to add 16 or 15 and a half hours onto that, so to make it a 55, 56 hour working week. Now, if you look at the amount of jobs, that part-time jobs, gig jobs that people have now, where they'll go from, one job to the next with the traveling and so on, then 56, 60 hours isn't really far off the mark with, what they need to do to make ends meet, or even slightly, get ahead. So he was pretty close there. Now, the other side of the equation that he was indirectly saying is that the elite class who are pushing this globalization, they should not be subject to any competition. So you have to compete with all the peasants of the world, but we, the elites, do not have to compete. We can allocate high-paying jobs to ourselves because we're steering the ship, as it were. So now, if you compare from, say, 1970, one of the bigger companies in Australia, the CEO wage of that was about 5 times the shop floor worker's wage. So the CEO of the company was paid 5 times more than the worker on the shop floor. Now the CEO also got other benefits, like a company car was thrown in. There was a very lavishly appointed executive dining room with sumptuous meals on tap, and these sorts of things. There was a generously stocked liquor cabinet, and so there are various benefits. An exotic vacation apartment on the beach, and so on. So these things were thrown in, but nonetheless, that was the difference. Now today, that's that same company. Instead of 5 times the shop floor wage, the CEO is paid 135 times the shop floor wage. So that's the difference. So what we've seen is this massive expansion in elite wages. No wonder they like globalization, for goodness sakes. But that would be impossible, because if they opened up those roles to competition, there's a lot of people wouldn't mind making millions a year. So if they opened up those roles to competition, then the wages would they wouldn't be that high. The other, they say, well, we're only hiring the best, which is utter and total bullshit. a lot of these people at the executive or at the apex, they're fucking morons. They're just well-connected socialites. That's all they are. They couldn't run a bath if they had to. So, and also many of them are now in a situation where they're sitting atop an oligopoly or a monopoly or a price cartel system. So they hardly have to be any good. Anybody, a first-year high school kid could run the company and make the same sort of get the same commercial results at least. So really, it's just a rewards, snats in the trough reward system for these globalist elites as they allocate vast sums of money and cozy, prestigious gigs to themselves and their relatives and their mistresses and the crowd that they run with. So it was a clear thing. We do not have to face competition. We do not, but you do. So you have to suffer the competition of the whole world coming to the West, but we don't. In fact, if anything, the competition factor will go into reverse. We can reduce the amount of competition we face, and in so doing, can increase our salaries by 100-fold, or even more than that, as in the case of this organisation. So in 1970, the CEO was getting paid $20,000 a year. Not a bad lick in 1969, I think it was. Whereas now that same CEO is getting paid, over $10 million a year, supposedly on performance, when the company's in a fucking oligopoly situation. It's very difficult to lose money. So, but I'll come back to how the disenfranchising has taken place. There's some very, very simple metrics. We don't have to look very hard. If we look at the average house price and average mortgage in 1970, then anyone who had a full-time job, pretty much, 75% of the workforce could afford to pay or service such a mortgage and own a car and excuse me, and have a family with 2.5 average children. Now today, that same average sort of mortgage, only 2.3% of the working. I mean, just let this sink in. 70% could afford the average house price mortgage in 1969-70. Today, only 2.3% of workers could afford to carry that sort of mortgage, and that's assuming that 50% of their income goes on the mortgage. So that gives you an idea. So and these people, of course, have an average of 0.9 children per family. So down from the 2.5 that it was. So it'll give you an illustration. Now, I should add that the average mortgage now doesn't buy you very much. It doesn't buy you a house in a nice area. It doesn't buy you access to good quality schools, or maybe a small apartment in a nice area, perhaps. But so it doesn't give you that. So if you want to have, if you want to live the tree-lined street, nice area type lifestyle, then you're looking at 0.3%, 1/3 of 1% of workers can afford that sort of lifestyle. And also, I just want to sort of, if you look at just people that are getting paid just under 3 times the average wage, just under 3 times the average wage, which by the time you've got tax and Social Security and stuff taken out, but only 4% of the workforce are getting paid 3 times the average wage. Now so that gives you an idea of how unaffordable the current lifestyle or the current cost of existence and cost of living is, given such a small number of people. Now, the people, interesting, that support globalization are overwhelmingly in that group. Not all, the college kids are still too dumb to know what they're voting for or what they want. But this is the people in that sort of money. That now we know these sort of people, and they say, mass migration is wonderful. But as long as it doesn't affect me, I don't want those people living near me, they say. And so they're very selective in how and why how and why they support. But I'll go through that. This disenfranchising has come in a a whole range of ways. Cost of living is obviously a very big one, but this guy is doing this talk in Sydney. He was very much of the view that the position that we've already decided the white working class people, that they are irrelevant to us. We've already decided that what they want and their views or their needs or their requirements or their democratic rights to express their will through the ballot box were already disengaging, in fact, have disengaged from that. So we're already declaring their views as irrelevant. And we can just say, look, mass migration is happening. You will be competing with the rest of the world. Too bad if you don't like it. That's how it is. Nothing to discuss. And the inference was, in fact, it was pretty direct. The inference was that there's nothing you can do about it democratically. We own the decision-making process, and it is not subject to your vote or your writing to your local politicians, and it's not subject to the representative form of government that you're hitherto used to. So what white people, Western white people in the rich and wealthy white Western democracies, the process was already happening where the democratic decision-making exercise was moving away from elected representatives to unelected international tribunals. It could be the World Health Organization, the United Nations, the European Union, international courts of justice, and this was being cheered on by the elites. Now, the elites held this funny view that if you restricted, black people from voting, it was an outrageous thing. Racism, Hitler, Nazis, fascism, But if you restrict white working class people from voting, then you're stopping Nazis from voting. And the idea was these people will vote for example, to stop mass migration or to reduce it, these sorts of things. And that was viewed as, well, that's populist. If it's populist, it's Nazi. If it's Nazi, it's Hitler. And so these people were written off as Nazis. But if the same thing was applied to stop black people from voting, or lesbians, or anybody, any other group, then it was considered as an outrageous, again, it was Nazis doing it. So either way, these people were sort of being written off as Nazis. And the whole idea sort of gathered steam, whereas you wouldn't hear, say, prior to, 2008, you'd hear the Nazi, oh, you're a fascist, all that was fascist was widely used, but it didn't really pick up until 2008, 2009, when suddenly it was a full-on thing where anyone who disagreed with the globalization was a Nazi, if not Hitler personally. So the idea if you could vote in your representatives, and your representatives in the parliament would represent your concerns, and that policy will be formulated around those concerns, and that the policies of the political parties would address those concerns, that was in the process of disappearing then. I didn't quite see it at the time. I could see where this would lead, but I thought there is no way these people could take over our elected representatives. They just wouldn't be able to do it. Our Australian elected representative, or any country for that matter, they're not going to let these people just ride roughshod over the democratic process. Of course, how wrong could I be? It was intriguing how easily they were able to do it. If you look at we've now got a class of professional ideologues who've never had a job, who are making all our decisions. If you look at the politicians today, it's only a handful of them actually had any jobs. So they go from radicalized in high school, working in NGOs, double radicalized, going into university, triple radicalized, continuing to be more active in the NGO scene. So, quadruple radicalized. Then they're going to work going into the office of a politician as a flunky or a researcher or a propagandist or, a social media analyst or something like that. And then they're being gifted because they're super pro-globalist or super anti, white people and their concerns. And they're given then safe electoral districts to be elected for. They don't have to try anything. They don't have to try. They had no job. They've never had to overcome any sort of situation. They're just being as long as they suck up to the those patronage givers. That's all they need to do, and then they've got this job for life in a safe electoral district. But they've never had a real job, as in having to go out in the world and make their own way, and that means they're eternally undergraduate sociology students, and they're that way for the rest of their lives. They don't change. And the idea of getting people into Parliament who represent the various diaspora in a multicultural society, this has had a colossal effect in dumbing down the populace. I mean, look at people like Ilhan Omar and Cory Bush and those, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the United States, this sort of thing. They're fucking morons, aren't you? So, and it's the same happening in other countries. But you look at Diane Abbott and David Lammy in the United Kingdom, for example. We've got plenty of examples here in Australia. So there's the competition meant that the purchasing power of the Western worker was taking a dive. Now, if you're in an occupation that supports globalization, there's a new industry of globalization activists, ideologue, propagandists, diversity, equity, inclusion officer, a lot of HR officer positions, those sorts of things. They're very much part of that. But also in big finance, banking and say insurance. Insurance plays a big role in furthering the globalist agenda. So, well, we won't insure your company, or we won't insure your workers, we won't insure your building project or something like that, unless you do the following things. You must have X amount of black lesbians. You must have this. You must make one press release a week supporting climate change. You must make one press release a week condemning white supremacists, and so on. So they're able to coerce, this ESG thing. They're able to coerce a lot of companies by saying, well, you can't, we won't insure you, we won't give you a bank account, we won't give you a loan, we'll make sure your stock price tanks on the market. Things like this. So there's a lot of things they can do to coerce all sorts of organisations into compliance. So the board of directors looks at, hey, we can collect a couple of $1 million bonus each this year. If we go along with these bullies and thugs, or we can fight back and we can, we'll probably lose our jobs. There's going to be a whole stack of white powder that's going to be magically found in the middle of our lounge room floor, or there's some little tiny frail little waif of a girl's going to with the torn blouse going to say he tried to rape me. And they might as well just go along. They go along and get rich. If they defy it, they'll be destroyed, or they'll have a hell of a fight on their hands. And who wants that? And that's the power of these things. But it overall, the disenfranchisement has occurred in a number of areas. One is that white people, their vote no longer matters. If perchance a Donald Trump appears and looks like he might garner a big enough vote, then they'll take him down through other means, outside of the electoral process, either within it through imaginative, mathematical tabulations, or they'll harass him with lawsuits, these sorts of things. So the vote, the franchise, as in the right to vote and choose your government and choose that government's policies or have influence over, that's gone. White people don't have that anymore. But also, the rule of law, due legal process, independent courts. Courts are now, the whole justice system in the West is totally politicized. Only legal cases that the globalists don't care about are getting impartial judgment and based on the evidence. Everything else is politically, ideologically decided, and outcomes decided accordingly. That's how corrupted our legal system is now. Again, this is all across the West, and you can see this in all sorts of ways. It doesn't have to be January 6th. You can see how climate change activists can create any sort of mayhem they want, and the police will do nothing. But as soon as citizens try to move them out of the way on the road, the police will rush in and arrest the citizen. I mean, it's insane, but this is what's happening now. But again, this is part of the wider disenfranchised disenfranchisement process. So whereas white people had affordable housing and affordable living and these sorts of things, that's gone. Representative government's gone. The rule of law, impartial application, that's gone. Due legal process, that's gone. The ability to have your electorate, have your elected representatives caring about you or concerned about, wow, look at all the people that are dying from these price increases in energy. Wow, we can't have that. We can't have our fellow citizens dying like this. Instead, they don't give a fuck. We've got an ideological goal here. We're saving the planet. We're saving the planet from Hitler. And so they'll just go ahead and do that regardless of collateral damage. So I would sort of say that really the Western white citizen has been thoroughly and totally disenfranchised. And we had a system where it was a contract between the people and the governed, where the people would hand over power to a government. Their elected representatives were meant to be from them, from their local people and local members that they would choose, that everybody knew or many people knew. And the power of society was through clearly codified laws, through elections, independent courts, clearly codified contracts. It was an overall contract at many levels, but that's gone now. It makes societies rich, and there are very few societies were able to achieve that. So the people were placing implicit trust in their government, their institutions, and the globalists quite skillfully, I believe, penetrated all those institutions, took them over, and exploited the trust that the people had. Now that trust is going away, which means that the globalists have to make sure that they control the media. We've only got one source of narrative to also, try and crush any opposition through activist courts. Put people in prison that disagree with them, and we're seeing that now. So I think Western white people have been hugely disenfranchised. Whether you look at cost of living, representative government, rule of law, it doesn't matter which any direction you look in. For example, nobody would vote for this climate change nonsense. It would be trounced at the polls. People wouldn't vote for mass migration. That would be trounced at the polls. So really, there's nothing that the globalists are trying to do has the support of the majority, or anything other than, say, 20%, give or take, of the people. And even that would be only some of the policies. Less than that, I think, in reality. And also, you look at when people are stopped in the street. So do you believe in mass migration? Oh, we're all human beings. you look at that and say, well, will you take some black men into your honor? Oh, not me. Someone else can do that. So as long as they can pass it off to some sort of miasma of the government or the taxpayer, as long as they can pass it off to that, they can feel moral and virtuous. But when they have to deal with it, then suddenly they don't want it. They don't want it anywhere near them, which is of course a hypocrisy of our modern times. You've been with Tasseless today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.